What if I told you a simple bouquet of flowers almost caused a scandal at Buckingham Palace? That a 6-year-old girl was stopped by security. But what happened after shocked an entire nation? This isn't clickbait, it's a real story. One that unfolds behind the stiff, silent walls of the British Royal Guard. A story about rules so strict they forbid even the smallest gesture. And yet, one tiny act of kindness broke through, changing everything. Imagine standing perfectly still for hours in heavy uniform, knowing you cannot speak, smile, or even move your eyes the way you want. Then imagine a child approaches with a gift, but you're not allowed to accept it. What happens next isn't what most people expect. You'd think the story ends there, right? The girl walks away disappointed. The guard stays silent. But what if I told you the soldier secretly carried that bouquet all day, and that night he did something no one saw, something quiet, something powerful, something that almost nobody talks about? This story isn't just about a soldier or a child. It's about respect, gratitude, and breaking invisible barriers without breaking a single rule. It's about how one small moment of humanity can ripple across an entire country, and how silence sometimes speaks louder than words. Before you decide this is just a feel-good story, listen closely, because there's a twist. What the soldier did next, it changed the way people see not only the Royal Guard, but what it means to be truly thankful. So stay with me, because this story will make you rethink everything you thought you knew about duty, kindness, and respect. Welcome to Tales and Truths, the channel where real stories unfold beyond what meets the eye. Today, we bring you a story from Buckingham Palace, a story about a 6-year-old girl, a simple bouquet of flowers, and a royal guard bound by strict rules. It's a tale of silent gratitude, unseen kindness, and a moment that shook an entire nation. Here, we dive deep into moments that reveal the humanity behind tradition and discipline, stories that make us rethink what we know about respect, duty, and connection. If you're ready to explore heartfelt truths that touch the soul and challenge the ordinary, you're in the right place. So, stay with us, and let's uncover this remarkable story together. One small act, one silent thank you, and one unforgettable lesson in kindness. Welcome to Tales and Truths. Let the journey begin. It was one of those crisp London mornings. Not too cold, not too warm, just enough sunlight to make the stone of Buckingham Palace glow like history itself was breathing. Crowds had already begun to gather, tourists with cameras, children with wide eyes, and those hoping to catch just a glimpse of ceremony of something older than themselves. In the middle of that crowd was a little girl, maybe 6 years old, tiny frame, golden hair tied back with a red ribbon that matched the flowers she was holding, clumsily wrapped but clearly picked with care. She wasn't interested in selfies or in posing with the guards like most kids her age. No, her eyes were fixed on just one man, a royal guard, standing still, stoic, unshaken. To most, he was part of the architecture, like the columns or the iron gates, but to her, he looked like a hero. And in her little hands, the bouquet of red poppies she held wasn't just flowers. It was her way of saying thank you. You see, her father had told her stories the night before, about soldiers, about people who stood in the rain, in the cold, in wars and never moved. People who protected others even when no one said thank you, especially then. And somehow, this little girl had decided that this man, this stranger in The bearskin hat deserved a thank you. So she tugged her father's hand and said, "Can I give him these?" He looked at her, smiled, nodded gently. "You can try." They walked slowly toward the guard. The girl gripped the flowers tightly. The petals trembled slightly in the breeze. But just as they reached the rope barrier, a security officer stepped forward, firm, polite, British to the core. "I'm sorry, she can't approach the guard." The little girl froze. She didn't cry. She didn't complain. She just looked up at the guard, and then down at her flowers. Then she turned, stepped back behind the barrier, and stood quietly by her father's side. The royal guard, of course, didn't move. That's the rule. No gestures, no words, no breaks in the performance of absolute control. But behind that stillness, something shifted. Maybe it was in the way his jaw tensed for a brief second, or the way his eyes followed the girl as she walked away. Nothing dramatic, just human. And that's where the story begins, not with shouting, not with spectacle, but with a moment that almost no one noticed. A child with a kind heart, a soldier, bound by duty, and a moment between them that would echo far beyond the gates of Buckingham Palace. The girl didn't say anything as she stepped back, her small fingers still clutching the poppies like they meant something, like they were more than just petals and stems. Her father knelt beside her, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. He whispered something, maybe a gentle "it's okay," or perhaps "you tried." But she didn't look at him. She was still looking at the guard, and the guard was still looking straight ahead, unmoving, expressionless, a monument in red and black. That's the thing about the royal guards. They're trained to endure anything: heat, cold, noise, ridicule. People have danced in front of them, screamed in their faces. Some have even tried to make them laugh. And through it all, they stand like statues carved out of duty. But this wasn't ridicule. This wasn't laughter. This was a child trying to say thank you with flowers too big for her. Hands. And somehow, that's harder to ignore. There was no visible reaction, no glance, no shift in posture, but something imperceptible hung in the air. Like the quiet that comes right after you miss a moment when you didn't. T realized was important until it had already passed. The crowd, of course, moved on. A family behind them started taking selfies. A busker began playing something that echoed faintly against the palace gates. The world spun forward as if nothing had happened. But for the guard, something had. Inside that rigid, silent exterior was a man who had stood for hours. Not just a day, but dozens of times before. In heat waves and snowstorms, during loud protests and crowded ceremonies. But today, in those few seconds, something different had happened. He hadn't been mocked. He hadn't been challenged. He had been seen. Truly seen. Not as a symbol, not as a photo op, but as someone worth saying thank you to. And because of the rules he had sworn to follow, he could do nothing. No nod, no smile, no gesture of acknowledgement. He just had to stand there, while a little girl walked away with her flowers and a heart slightly heavier than it had been a few minutes before. Her father lifted her into his arms. She laid her head on his shoulder, quiet, still holding the bouquet. She didn't cry, but something about her silence said more than any tear could have. And somewhere, deep behind that stoic stare and polished brass buttons, a soldier wished just for a moment that the rules were different, that he could have said, "Thank you." Night had fallen over London by the time the Royal Guard's shift ended. The crowds had long since thinned out, and the glowing lamps along the palace walls cast long shadows on the cobblestones. The soldier removed his bearskin hat and adjusted his jacket as he prepared to leave the post. But something stayed with him. That small girl with the red ribbon, the gentle grip on a fragile bouquet of poppies, it lingered in his mind like a whispered memory. He knew the rules, the discipline, the tradition, and he had always followed them without question. But that night, in the quiet of his small quarters, he found himself doing something he'd never done before. He took out a pressed flower from the bouquet she had tried to give him, carefully preserved between the pages of his notebook, a secret treasure he'd kept hidden all day. Then he asked around, quietly, for the family's address. It wasn't easy. The palace security was strict, the guard regiment even more so. But his request wasn't denied. And so, with the address in hand, he put on his civilian clothes and walked through the quiet streets, past the dimly lit shops and shuttered windows. He stood before a small, modest house where the little girl lived. A soft light spilled from the window, casting a warm glow onto the sidewalk. He hesitated for a moment, unsure how to begin. Then he gently knocked. The door opened to reveal the girl's father. Surprised to see a stranger standing there in the fading night, the soldier spoke softly, carefully choosing his words. "I couldn't accept your daughter's flowers today," he said. "The rules don't allow it, but I wanted to thank you. That bouquet, it lifted my spirits during a long, hard shift." The man nodded, eyes moist. Inside, the soldier handed over the pressed flower. The father looked down at it, understanding. Something unspoken. It wasn't just a flower. It was a bridge between two worlds, the duty-bound silence of a soldier and the pure, innocent gratitude of a child. For a moment, words weren't necessary. The soldier's visit became a quiet legend in the neighborhood. The father shared the story with friends and neighbors, how a man who never smiled or bowed during the day had come to thank them in the night. No fanfare, no photos. Just a simple act of gratitude. And somewhere, in the heart of that little girl, a new kind of pride blossomed, knowing that her small gesture had reached a place far beyond what she could ever see. The next morning, the story was still quietly unfolding, but not in the way anyone expected. The father of the little girl didn't plan to share what had happened. It was a private moment, after all, between a soldier and a family. But as he recounted the visit to close friends, the words slipped out onto social media, shared softly and without fanfare. A simple post. "A man who never bowed to anyone came to thank my daughter's family last night. He carried a flower pressed between pages, a small token that meant everything." The post struck a chord. People were drawn not by spectacle or drama, but by the quiet dignity behind it. The royal guards were no longer just symbols. They were people with stories, feelings, and sacrifices no one saw. The story spread. Local news picked it up, then national outlets. Comments poured in. Gratitude for the soldier's humility, admiration for the little girl's innocence, and a deeper appreciation for the unspoken bonds that hold a nation together. But the soldier himself remained silent. He continued his duties as if nothing had changed, standing perfectly still, stoic, unmoved. Yet, beneath the bearskin hat and polished uniform, something had shifted. A silent thank you had been given, not with words, not with grand gestures. But with a heart full of respect, reaching out in the only way it could. And the little girl, she carried on, unaware of how much her small bouquet had meant. but somewhere deep inside, she felt a warmth, a quiet magic born from a moment of true connection. That's the power of gratitude. It doesn't always need to be spoken aloud. Sometimes it's enough that it's felt. Word of the soldier's quiet visit spread faster than anyone could have imagined. It wasn't a headline-grabbing scandal or a viral stunt. It was something simpler and far more powerful. A story about respect, about gratitude, about the small moments that connect us. Even across walls of tradition and silence, people began to see the royal guards in a new light. No longer just stoic figures frozen in red and black uniforms, but as human beings, men and women with hearts that beat beneath the bearskin hats. On social media, posts appeared sharing stories of other quiet moments of kindness between guards and visitors. Strangers who left notes, little gifts, or simply a smile. The public started to appreciate the sacrifices these guards made, standing still for hours, guarding a history that belonged to everyone. Schools began to tell the story of the little girl and the guard, teaching children about respect and the power of small gestures. The palace itself even quietly acknowledged the story, a rare nod to the humanity behind the ceremony. And the little girl, she grew up knowing that her simple act of kindness had touched more lives than she could ever imagine, that sometimes the smallest hands can make the biggest difference. Her bouquet, once just a handful of flowers, had become a symbol of connection, of respect, of gratitude. And in a world so often loud and fast, it reminded everyone that sometimes the quietest moments speak the loudest, because no matter how far apart we seem, there are always ways to reach out, to say thank you. To be seen. Years passed. The girl, once small enough to barely reach the guard's belt, was now taller, older, with longer hair and quieter steps. She no longer remembered all the details of that day, not the coldness of the air, nor the exact look on the guard's face, but she remembered the flowers, and she remembered how her dad looked at her afterward, not with disappointment, but with something deeper, pride, maybe, or love, wrapped in silence. One rainy afternoon, while cleaning out a drawer, she found something she hadn't seen in years, a notebook. Her father's old travel journal. Inside it, pressed between two worn pages, was a single red poppy, faded now, fragile at the edges. Tucked beside it was a small piece of paper. In handwriting she didn't recognize. It read, "Some uniforms don't allow us to bend, but hearts always do." There was no name, just those words, written by someone who couldn't speak that day, but found a way to be heard later. She closed the notebook and sat in silence for a long time. Outside the window, people hurried past. Taxis splashed through puddles. Phones rang. The world moved fast. But in her hands was proof that not everything was forgotten. A child's gesture, a soldier's restraint, a quiet moment between strangers that had, somehow, lasted all these years. She smiled, not the kind of smile that comes with laughter, but the kind that says, "I remember. I understand now." And maybe that's what matters most, that even when moments seem small, almost invisible, they can echo for a lifetime. Sometimes, we don't get to see the difference we make, but somewhere, someone remembers the day we showed kindness, even when no one was watching. Real honor doesn't need medals. It lives in the quiet choices we make and the hearts we quietly reach.